Put that down now! Put it down!
Dave, stay there. Dave, stay there, mate.
Brooks doused the ground floor of Mr Perk's home in petrol before going on to stab him.
75! Right! 70! Get down!
This month, lovely viewer, 9 murders, 2 attempted murders, all wild, all untold, all perpetrators having been sent down in June 2025. Enjoy. Even when 42-year-old drug smuggler Tahir Syed, who comes from Halifax, West Yorkshire in the northwest, went on the run abroad after kidnapping, torturing and murdering his very own uncle, 39-year-old bus driver Asghar Badshah, he carried on his drug trafficking operations. When, on the 29th of November 2019, alongside 4 of his henchmen, if you will, he bundled Mr Badshah into a Mercedes in Bradford, drove him to a disused bank over in Batley and beat the shit out of him. Syed was, in fact, on something of a break as an international fugitive. Now viewer, if I've got you hooked on the story so far, do subscribe, give the video a like, drop a comment when you're ready and donate. Hit the thanks button below, I'll appreciate you. In September 2019, Syed's so-called right-hand man, Yusuf Kara, 36, as well as another member of Syed's gang, Imran Khan Ashraf, also 36, were spotted in Bradford by either the police or NCA, National Crime Agency, officers, or possibly by both, moving heavy bags between at least 2 vehicles. On subsequently being arrested over in Bolton, Greater Manchester, Ashraf was found to have £130,000 in cash hidden in his car. Law enforcement seized not only the cash but also the 4 mobile phones that Ashraf was carrying. When, later that same afternoon, Kara was arrested, NCA officers found no fewer than 51 kilos of heroin in his home, while police officers took possession of the 2 mobile phones that the man had in his possession. The said 51 kilos of heroin were nothing, you might say, compared to the tons of that drug, plus, similarly, the shed loads of cocaine that Syed and his gang shipped into the UK in containers of frozen chicken, no less, between 2016 and 2021. And see, I told you the perpetrator continued his drug trafficking business even while he was on the run for murder. I think you can work out what else he ended up being on the run for. Anyway, having rapidly learned of the arrests of 2 of his gang members, Syed didn't hang around for law enforcement to discover through any one or more of the 6 mobile phones that they had seized, if not through direct disclosures from Ashraf and Kara themselves, his involvement in the gang and its drug smuggling operations. Just before scarpering abroad, as he did 2 days later, Syed got his uncle to hide £600,000 in cash, which the perpetrator had made from his drug smuggling, of course, for him. To this day, it isn't known who nicked the money from the car inside the garage of Mr Badshah's mother's home, which was where Mr Badshah stashed it. In response to both Syed's fury at the theft of his money and at the man's intention to get him to take a lie detector test to see if he was the one who had stolen from him, Mr Badshah texted his nephew to say, quote, "I'm in fear for my life. I couldn't sleep all night. I'm shaking writing these messages. Please let me sit the lie detector and show it's not me. I never went near the garage and don't want to be involved in your dealings and never did." Unquote. Mr Badshah took not 1 but 2 lie detector tests, his nephew having returned to the country to get him to take the tests. The bank that Mr Badshah was taken to on the 29th of November 2019, a former branch of Yorkshire Bank, was owned by a so-called associate of Syed and was undergoing renovation. When he was carried away by all of 5 violent thugs to this place, Mr Badshah had just arrived at his mother's house in Bradford after finishing his shift at Brickhouse bus station. His body was found hidden on a shelving unit inside a vault in the bank on the 29th of December 2019, a month after his murder. Police had gone looking for the victim after he was reported missing by none other than his identical twin brother. A post-mortem examination found that Mr Badshah had been whacked with a blunt object, which was later identified as a metal rod, at least 48 times on his head, neck, torso and all 4 limbs. It was a sustained assault. The victim had been tortured all through the night. Mr. Badshaw, as you've presumably gathered, failed both of his lie detector tests, which, for his nephew, could only mean one thing. On the 5th of December 2019, a week after beating his uncle to death, Syed scarpered first to Albania, then to Kosovo, and lastly to Turkey, all using a false North Macedonian passport. He and his gang then smuggled 200 kilos of heroin and cocaine into the UK. But in August 2020, they had their 155 kilo cocaine shipment that was destined for the Netherlands intercepted and seized by the Dutch authorities. Following a global manhunt, Syed was arrested in Turkey on the 11th of November 2021. After his ensuing 2-year battle against extradition, he was finally brought back to the UK to stand trial. Before the man's own trial, many of his gang members had already been banged up themselves, including Yusuf Kara and Imran Khan Ashraf, plus the 4 who took part in Mr. Badshah's kidnap. The 34-year minimum term of imprisonment that Syed was given as a life sentence at Leeds Crown Court on the 13th of June 2025 was for Mr. Badshah's kidnap, torture and murder, as well as for the perpetrator's drug trafficking. Given what he did to his own uncle though, his own flesh and blood, in my opinion, the man should just have been given a whole life prison sentence.
Hello.
Hello, mate. All right. Is it just you here, or?
No, it's me and my mate Dave.
All right. Cool.
Wait.
Wait. Wait a minute. Where's Dave?
Mate.
Dave. Dave, stay there. Dave, stay there, mate. Right.
If what the guy who answered the door, Mark Roberts, 39, and his mate Dave, David Garland, 40, did wasn't so serious, we could all have a good laugh at their behaviour during their arrest. 37-year-old divorced father of one, Michael Wheeler, who came from Yeovil in Somerset, southwest England, was last seen alive at a petrol station on the evening of the 23rd of August 2024. 1 month later, the man's remains were found in an abandoned caravan on farmland in Yarlington, which is just a few miles away from Yeovil. His post-mortem examination uncovered the multiple injuries that he had suffered, including 11 fractures to his skull and face. Mr. Wheeler's killers were his very friends, David Garland and Mark Roberts. Mr. Wheeler's mother, who was suffering from a terminal illness when her son was murdered and who died before her son's murderer stood trial, wrote a victim impact statement that said, amongst other things, quote, "I have had my DNR, do not resuscitate, changed so that I can try and stay alive as long as possible. I want to make it to trial. I want to see justice served on these people," unquote. Mr. Wheeler's big sister, meanwhile, has lamented the loss both to herself and to her children. The victim's own ex-wife describes her ex-husband as her best friend who, on her lowest days, would always find a way to make her smile, and whose daughter will now not only not get to see more of her father, as they had all planned for her to do, but will, of course, never see him again. When his 2 mates murdered him, Mr. Wheeler owed one of them, Mark Roberts, £100. But this wasn't actually a big deal to Roberts. What turned both him and Garland against their friend, rather, was their discovery, coming from their online research, of his act of grooming and then essaying 2 13-year-old girls. Wheeler had been jailed for those offences some years before, but had, naturally, never let on about his dirty past to his friends. For the 2 perpetrators, that was it. Their child SHX abuser friend had to die. Mr. Wheeler was wholly innocent, however, the man having been 16 years of age when the true perpetrator, who shared his name, was imprisoned, the year having been 2003. Mr. Wheeler's life was taken from him for nothing. On the 13th of June 2025 at Bristol Crown Court, Garland got life with a minimum of 32 years, while Roberts got life with a minimum of 27 years. In my opinion, neither sentence is anywhere near long enough. On the evening of the 31st of January 2025, 28-year-old Alexander Dighton, who comes from Pontyclun in Mid Glamorgan, Wales, put on a bulletproof vest and then armed himself with an axe, a knife, a long wooden pole which had sharpened metal plates attached to one end, and a bag full of petrol bombs, and then left his home. Having arrived at Talbot Green police station a short while later, the man threw an ignited petrol bomb at a police van that was parked just outside the police station's entrance. Neither this petrol bomb nor the one that the perpetrator threw straight after, however, ignited. Likewise, the man's subsequent acts of pouring petrol in front of the van and then lighting it, putting tins containing burger fat and wood chippings under the van and lighting those, and putting 2 containers of lighter fluid under the van's bonnet, acts which were, of course, all meant to set the van on fire, all failed to start a fire. Feeling no doubt both dismayed and immensely frustrated at all his failed attempts to set fire to the van, Dighton next did this, and understand that a bulletproof vest is also taser-proof.
Right, where's my taser?
Right! Put that down now! Put it down! Now! Put it down! Drop it or I will taser you now! Drop it! Drop it! I'm fed up! Right! I'm done! I'm done! 75! Right! 75! Get down! Get down!
Get on the floor now!
Why is that not working?
Get on the floor! Spray! Get on the floor!
75 wasn't good, thanks. I'm done.
Get down!
Your government is founded on...
Get down on the floor!
Get on the floor!
Get down! Now! Get on the floor!
I got him. Wait, calm down. I'm on the bottom.
I got him.
You may, in all the chaos that unravels once the perpetrator steps inside the police station, have missed the man's acts of punching one police officer in the head and of stabbing another in the thigh, only narrowly missing the man's femoral artery. The stab, no less, turned out to be all of 4 inches deep. In the meantime, a small fire had actually been burning under the van, but once officers restrained the perpetrator, one officer, who had since noticed the fire, was able to kick the actual thing that was burning away from the van, preventing the fire from catching further. Dighton's reference to the number 75, meanwhile, was an indication of his personal belief that Muslim grooming gangs have been operating since as far back as 1950. Speaking of the man's visceral hatred for Muslims, a year before the man's attacks on police and on police property, the man's own sister had referred her brother to the government's anti-terror scheme, PREVENT, in light of both his avowed racist and anti-Muslim views and his likely involvement with incel groups. Dighton was not made to join the scheme, however, as he was deemed not to actually pose a terror threat. A slight error of judgment on the part of the PREVENT administrators, you might say. In keeping with Dighton's hateful thinking and hateful behaviour, the man's online activity showed, according to Judge Mark Lecraft KC, who was in charge of the perpetrator's sentencing, the man's increasing fixation on issues such as diversity, you-know-what-ophilia, immigration, anti-Islamic sentiments and dissatisfaction with the British government. Worryingly, at the time of his attacks, Dighton was on bail for a prior public order offence. When, a week before his Talbot Green police station attacks, he received a letter from the police relating to his public order offence, he had sharpened a shovel in order to use it to murder any police officers who might have come calling in connection to the said letter. In case it's not already sufficiently clear, Dighton attacked both police officers and a police van on the 31st of January 2025 to punish the government itself for so-called multiculturalism and, to paraphrase, other disgusting and unforgivable evils.
You targeted the police as, in your words, the keystone of government power. You said you were opposed to what you said were the left-wing homogeny of British politics, and so that right-wing parties that rise up, such as the BNP, get shut down. You spoke of wanting an outcome, again in your words, an acknowledgement that the functions of government on all sides have failed to uphold their duties in the state themselves, to protect our children, to enforce our borders, to uphold law and order, to ensure we don't get invaded, and acceptance that all of those have failed.
Dighton pleaded guilty to charges of attempted arson with intent to endanger life, attempted murder, attempted grievous bodily harm with intent, threatening with an offensive weapon, battery, having an offensive weapon and bladed articles in a public place, and criminal damage. On the 13th of June 2025 at the Old Bailey, he got life with a 22-year minimum term. The reason for the falling out between former friends Junior Uwadia, 25, and Clinton Antwi, 23, both from Northampton, South East England, isn't clear, but the falling out itself is why, on the 11th of December 2024, Uwadia stabbed Mr Antwi to death in the Standons Barn area of the town. Over a period of 2 days, the said quarrel between the two young men escalated. CCTV evidence, in fact, showing Mr Antwi driving at Uwadia a few days before the murder. As a result of this act of aggression from Mr Antwi, Uwadia armed himself with a large kitchen knife. In chilling messages that were subsequently recovered by detectives, Uwadia wrote that, quote, "If I come back, someone is going to heaven," unquote. Mr Antwi was pronounced dead at Northampton General Hospital around 6:15 p.m. on the 11th of December 2024, approximately 45 minutes after Uwadia stabbed him twice in the back outside Flaxwell Court, having lured his victim to him on the pretense of wanting to make up with him. As he fled the murder scene in his car, the perpetrator was heard saying, quote, "I told you this would happen," unquote. When, a few days later, the man was arrested at his home, police found the murder weapon along with a handwritten note from the murderer reminding himself to, quote, "get rid of the splasher," unquote. On the 18th of June 2025, at Northampton Crown Court, Uwadia got life with a 23-year minimum term.
Peter Brooks tried to kill Graham Perks in Nottinghamshire by stabbing him after setting his home on fire.
This all happened in the early hours of the morning. Mr Perks heard a loud bang, went to investigate, which is when this awful event took place.
In the early hours of the 14th of January 2021, a 61-year-old man by the name of Peter Brooks cycled from his house in Southwell in Nottinghamshire over to the home of 65-year-old Graham Perks, who lives in Hallam near Southwell, broke in, tried to set the place on fire, and then, on being caught in the act by Mr Perks himself, stabbed the man hard in the abdomen before making his escape. Mr Perks was a plastic surgeon, and Brooks was furious with him for, the way he saw it, ruining his life.
Brooks doused the ground floor of Mr Perks' home in petrol before going on to stab him, and you can see he gets on his bike, there he goes, and leaves the scene.
Lousy nose job, naff facelift, catastrophic penile enhancement surgery. Were these the reasons for Brooks's anger towards Mr Perks? Some hours after his acts, Brooks was discovered asleep on a bench in the garden of one of his neighbours, his being there having been due to the overdose that he had taken. He was arrested soon after at the hospital that he subsequently went to in order to get treatment for the hand injuries that he had sustained. If the perpetrator hadn't worn gloves during his acts, he no less had with him the crowbar with which he had forced open the door to Mr Perks' conservatory and with which he smashed his way from there into the living room. Having also gone equipped with a knife, petrol, matches and a lighter, the man was dressed in a camouflage suit and a balaclava. It turns out that all these items were already in Brooks's possession long before he perpetrated his acts against Mr Perks, which, along with other evidence, showed that the perpetrator had hardly spent any time at all planning his attack. Brooks did what he did practically the very day that he came up with the idea. But why did Brooks do what he did? Having a long history of charity work, the man had served as a school governor and received, in his defence against his criminal charges, a number of glowing references from former colleagues and customers from his own job. The perpetrator is mildly autistic, but that condition was proven to have played no part whatsoever in the man's decisions and actions of the 14th of January 2021. By this date, however, Brooks's life was falling apart. His employment difficulties, these having been huge problems that the man was facing at this point, you see, were coming to a head, and the perpetrator had anticipated that the disciplinary hearing against him that had opened earlier that week was likely to lead to A, his dismissal, B, the loss of his home, and C, the breakdown of his marriage. There is, I think you'll agree, something in the conclusion formed by the judge, Mr. Justice Pepperell, that Brooks's anger at what he saw as the injustice and hopelessness of his situation is what led to the man's horrific acts. But what did Brooks's employment difficulties have to do with his victim? Why did Brooks feel, as he evidently did, that Mr. Perks was to blame for those difficulties? Once inside Mr. Perks's home, Brooks poured petrol all over the ground floor, making a point of pouring a substantial amount at the foot of the stairs that led up to the bedrooms. Not only was the perpetrator determined, as Mr. Justice Pepperell summed up in court, to kill, he didn't care who he might have killed along with his intended victim. 2 of the 3 adult children who lived at home happened to have been away that night, so the remaining adult child, along with Mr. and Mrs. Perks, who were all sleeping in bed, would have been the ones in danger of death from a fire. Brooks's act of stabbing Mr. Perks in the abdomen caused such severe damage to the man's liver, pancreas, duodenum, which attaches the stomach to the small intestine, and his inferior vena cava, the largest vein in the human body which carries deoxygenated blood back to the heart, that the surgeons who subsequently operated on him rated his chances of survival at 5%. A formerly physically fit individual, Mr. Perks, who miraculously survived, thank goodness, is now limited to moderate exercise only since the thrombosis of his repaired inferior vena cava has left the venous return of blood to his heart severely compromised. Moreover, the man now suffers atrial fibrillation, an abnormal heartbeat. As a plastic surgeon with the specialism of treating burns, meaning that he had substantial professional experience of treating those with the most devastating and painful burns, Brooks, no less, attempted to burn Mr. Perks to death. Likewise, as a trained surgeon who dedicated himself to saving lives, the perpetrator no less plunged a knife deep into his victim's belly with the same murderous intent. Brooks believed that without the testimony of Mr. Perks, who was his colleague and who had actually retired a month before he was stabbed, he could defeat the complaints against him which formed the basis of his disciplinary process. This is why the perpetrator did what he did. Brooks's convictions, which came in April 2025 after a month-long trial at Loughborough Crown Court, followed a 4-year criminal justice process against the antagonist, which included, rather outrageously, a mistrial plus no fewer than 7 aborted trial dates. All of these botched trials sprung, you understand, from the perpetrator's recourse to hunger strikes or the threat of some other sort of self-harm in order to frustrate the legal proceedings against him. Brooks's very voluntary absence from his trial of April 2025, in fact, was due to the hunger strike that he was on, the antagonist stating at this point that he would, quote, rather be dead than incarcerated, unquote. Having refused to leave his cell to attend his sentencing of the 9th of June 2025, and having, somewhat contradictorily, had his barrister advise the court that he was too unwell to attend, he listened to the proceedings via video link from HMP Norwich. On the point of Brooks's legal representation, over the 4 years that it took for a trial to finally take place, the perpetrator fired barrister after barrister, 5 in total. In his sentencing remarks, Mr Justice Pepperell dismissed Brooks's claim, which he expressed through his barrister of course, that he had since grown remorseful of his acts against Mr Perks. All the judge could see was that the perpetrator had a fixed view that he was hounded out of his employment by what he described as the medical mafia, and that the man now felt nothing but self-pity at where he has since ended up. As of the 9th of June 2025, for offences of attempted murder and attempted arson, Brooks is doing life with a minimum of 22 years. Now, if you can explain why the perpetrator wasn't convicted under Section 91A of the Theft Act 1968 of burglary as well, I'll appreciate you. At around 10 a.m. on the 17th of September 2024, 23-year-old Jonathon Austin, a South African living in Cambridge, South East England, went and withdrew some money from a cash point, then did a bit of shopping at a co-op, and then went round the home of his former flatmate, 38-year-old Neil Lakhani, and strangled him to death. When Mr Austin accused his victim, as he did once he entered the man's home, of stealing his passport, he and Mr Lakhani got into an argument which eventually turned physical, Austin throwing the first punch. Whatever Mr Lakhani then picked up to use on his assailant, he soon found the man dispossessing him of it and then strangling him long and hard. After throttling Mr Lakhani, Austin phoned his father to tell him what he'd done. I don't know what, if anything, his father advised him to do, but afterwards, at around 11:30 a.m, Austin called an ambulance. At 12:15 p.m, some minutes after their arrival, the ambulance workers pronounced the victim dead. Mr Lakhani's official cause of death was compression of the neck, but the victim was also found to have suffered a cardiac arrest. Having recently moved out of Mr Lakhani's flat in Greengates Court, Histon Road, and moved into a different flat in the same block, Austin subsequently disclosed to the police that his ex-flatmate, who was battling cancer along with mental health issues and had a history of drug addiction, was, quote, often abusive, unquote, and behaved erratically. In court, Judge David Farrell quoted these same facts against the victim, stating that Mr Lakhani used to have mood swings and could appear aggressive. The judge also observed, however, that Austin was much bigger, fitter and younger than his victim, and that, before he and Mr Lakhani got into the physical fight that led to Mr Lakhani's death, the perpetrator had ample opportunity to just walk away. In line with this, Judge Farrell told Austin that, quote, "You knew what you were doing. I am sure that you intended to kill him," unquote. In response to the perpetrator's claim of autism, Judge Farrell deemed that this did not have a significant impact on the man's culpability. I can't say whether Austin's claim of coming from a traumatic background made any difference to the sentence that he was given. On the 6th of June 2025 at Huntingdon Crown Court, Austin got life with a minimum of 16 years. I personally consider that sentence an insult to Mr Lakhani. On Wednesday the 7th of February 2024, police were called to a home address in Epsom, Surrey, South East England by South East Coast Ambulance Service who had responded to a patient in cardiac arrest. The patient was 47-year-old Jason Lucas, who had been seriously assaulted an hour before. The ambulance themselves had been called by 44-year-old Darren Hanson, Mr Lucas's friend. When police arrived at the address, which was Darren Hanson's own home, paramedics were in the process of resuscitating Mr Lucas. They told the police that Hanson had told them that, in the course of a fight with Mr Lucas from an hour or so before, he had knocked the man out in the hallway of his home. Despite the best efforts of the ambulance workers to save Mr Lucas's life, the victim died at the address without regaining consciousness. His cause of death was craniofacial injuries and associated injuries following a focused, severe force assault to the head. After being arrested, Hanson explained to police that he was both drunk and high at the time of his act against Mr Lucas and that he was devastated by his friend's death. He never said exactly why he did what he did though, the answer to that remaining a mystery even now. After making the disclosures that I've just mentioned, in fact, the antagonist went no comment all through his police interview. In subsequently pleading not guilty to murder, Hanson was, no doubt, looking for a manslaughter conviction, which usually attracts a much lighter sentence than a murder conviction. It doesn't always do so, however, and I've got a story coming up later that proves just that. After being found guilty on the 17th of June 2025 at Guildford Crown Court of none other than murder, however, on the 19th of June 2025, the perpetrator got life with a 19-year minimum term. Another sentence that's just way too short. Like fellow murderer Darren Hanson, 38-year-old Lee Young, who comes from Heanor in Derbyshire, murdered his friend, 62-year-old Sean Harriman, who lived in the same street as his killer, and has never explained why. CCTV outside Mr. Harriman's room showed the perpetrator, who was a regular user of crack cocaine and heroin, entering the property on the 29th of September 2024, the night of Mr. Harriman's death. However, and why ever it happened, Young strangled his victim to death with a ligature, the trial judge, Sean Smith KC, assessing that the victim, quote, didn't stand a chance, unquote. Following the killing, Young, who had 17 previous convictions for offences including robbery and possession of offensive weapons, bought drugs, and later returns to Mr. Harriman's property to stage a burglary in which he stole his victim's wallet and phone, plus some of his paperwork, and distanced himself as such from the crime. The jury at Derby Crown Court dismissed Young's claim that he strangled Mr. Harriman in self-defence after an argument. After being found guilty of murder in May 2025, on the 19th of June 2025, Young got life with a minimum term of 19 years, just like Darren Hanson again. And again, that isn't long enough, I'd say. The murder that took place on the 20th of December 2024 on the site of an abattoir in Kenilworth, Warwickshire, of 21-year-old James Bosworth from Nottingham by his 43-year-old fellow abattoir worker Stuart Baker, who comes from Somerset in the southwest, might by now feel like something of a cliche. To be exact, it stands as yet another case of a drug-inspired and wholly motiveless murder. You know, I feel like I've just told you the whole story, but to fill in the details, at around 3 p.m. on the said date, Mr. Bosworth had gone over to the on-site caravan in which Baker had been staying and where the man was present. Then, shortly after 5:23 p.m, Baker left his caravan wearing Mr. Bosworth's coat and carrying a phone in his hand before reappearing at the door of another of his colleagues, telling him that there was, quote, blood everywhere, unquote, and that the man needed to call the police. When officers arrived, they discovered Mr. Bosworth dead on the floor of Baker's caravan with catastrophic injuries. After arresting the perpetrator, they found wraps of cocaine in the man's pockets. After Baker's sentencing, Detective Inspector Gareth Unnett confirmed that, quote, Baker's drug-induced, drink-fueled attack was without sense or reason. Throughout the investigation, he has failed to explain his actions or provide answers as to why James was so brutally taken away from his family in this way, unquote. On the 13th of June 2025, at Warwick Crown Court, Baker got life with a minimum of 17.5 years. Another insulting sentence. Yet another case of an unprovoked murder is that of 32-year-old Theo Porteous, who came from Thornton Heath, South London. The talented footballer was murdered by 36-year-old Earl Morin-Britton from Sutton, South London. Horrifyingly, unlike the other motiveless murders that we've so far looked at, Mr. Porteous's murder, unravelling as it did in the car park of a block of flats in Battersea, South London on the 24th of August 2023, took place in broad daylight in full view of numerous members of the public. Mr. Porteous had been sitting in his car when Morin-Britton approached his vehicle and spoke to him through the open driver's window. Mr. Porteous then got out of the car and was immediately confronted by Morin-Britton, who pulled a knife from his shorts. The man then proceeded to stab Mr. Porteous in his face, neck and back. Despite the best efforts of members of the public who rushed to the victim's assistance the second the perpetrator took flight, along with those of paramedics and of police officers who promptly arrived at the scene, Mr. Porteous died from his injuries. Having been arrested a week later and then convicted of murder on the 6th of June 2025, on the 9th of June 2025 at Kingston Crown Court, Morin-Britton got life with a minimum term of 27 years. That's not long enough, I feel, but it's clearly an improvement on some of the other sentences that we've so far seen. There had been some sort of relationship between killer Paul Campbell, 43, from Thornton Heath, South London, and his victim, 62-year-old Dr. Gordon Ogunmuyiwa, who I'll be referring to from this point forward as Dr. Gordon, since Dr. Gordon's murder investigation uncovered a year-long history of brutal beatings against the victim from Campbell. Whatever the nature of their relationship was, Campbell having battered Dr. Gordon to death on Christmas Eve 2022, no less, Dr. Gordon is an innocent victim. Before fleeing his home after attacking his victim there, Campbell himself called an ambulance. By the time they arrived, however, Dr. Gordon was dead. According to DCI Samantha Townsend, who led the murder investigation, Dr. Gordon was a gentleman with no history of violence. His health, however, had started to suffer, and his bully of a friend or lover or whatever Campbell was to him promptly took advantage of that. For instance, not only did the perpetrator physically abuse his victim, he had also been using the man's credit cards. This hardly stopped after he killed Dr. Gordon, the antagonist, using his victim's cards to buy an iPhone from a second-hand shop a week after his act of killing. On the 11th of January 2023, Campbell was arrested on suspicion of murder and then charged the following day. While Dr. Gordon's post-mortem showed multiple injuries to his body, some new, some old, the beating that the victim got from Campbell on the 24th of December 2022 had been particularly vicious. Despite the perpetrator's extensive history of violence against Dr. Gordon, in court he was deemed not to have intended to kill his victim. After being convicted on the 8th of May 2025 at Woolwich Crown Court, not of murder but of manslaughter then, on the 10th of June 2025, Campbell got 21 years with an extended licence period of 5 years. This is longer, as you can see, than some of the sentences for murder that we have met in this set of crimes. If this video has gripped you, I recommend you to watch this one next. I'll meet you there.